Thank you, David. Thanks for having us. Thanks for this partnership. Welcome, Senator Pryor, Dean Pryor. This week, you lost a colleague, a very special friend, and as our friend Dan Ferreter, the Chancellor at the University of Arkansas, said, Dale Bumpers was someone who gave politics a good name. Would you talk about your friendship and work with Dale Bumpers?
Is it on? Am I on, Skip? Do you know? Am I on? This is awful. I get very emotional about this. In fact, Dale used to tell me, he says, David, you break out crying if we dedicate a new washateria sometime. But I get very emotional. I try to get by it, and I've got a little role to play in the ceremony on Sunday afternoon. I'm just hoping I don't make a fool out of myself and so forth. I hope I can get through that. But at any rate, he was not only my friend, he was our friend. He made Arkansas proud. And Dale probably was one of the most unique political figures that I've ever known anywhere in this state. But what was so unique about our relationship is many of the states where there are especially two senators from the same political party. For example, New Jersey, Bill Bradley, Frank Lautenberg. Those two guys never spoke to one another. I mean, there were states where the senators hated each other, the staffs hated each other. There was tension created and whatever. But Dale and I never had that. We had a relationship and a camaraderie and a friendship, and it was bound by common interests, yes, but just because we liked each other, I guess. I'm flattering myself saying he liked me, but I think he did. And he was a special person and a very, very special and warm friend. I loved his confidence. I loved his humor. I loved the things that he stood for, and he was very special. And when I say I loved his confidence, he did have a confidence that none of the rest of us seemed to, let's say, exemplify. I'll never forget the great oration he made right after he had left the Senate in the impeachment trial of President Clinton. I called him that night. I told this story many times. I used to tell it around him. But I called him and I said, Dale, that may have been the greatest speech ever given in the United States Senate. He said, I'm inclined to agree with you. And he was just that way, and that was Dale. And I used to tell the old story about us going to IHOP, Skip, one morning after that speech, and the news people from all over the world were after him to do interviews in London and all over the place, and wanting him to come and speak to this big convention and that convention and whatever. And he turned 99% of that away and turned it down. But we were at IHOP one morning having breakfast, and I noticed, I was looking over toward the cash register, and there were two waitresses over there, and they were talking, and they were pointing over toward us. And I said, Dale, I think you've been recognized here. And I said, they're going to come over and want your autograph in a minute. So sure enough, here they came. They said, we were having an argument over here at the cash register. Which one of y'all used to be sheriff of Pulaski County? So, we always enjoyed those stories. And then, Skip, we were called on by 8 or 10 groups from time to time to go around the state. We called it kind of the Antique Roadshow, and we were there. We'd go to Russellville and Hot Springs and Fort Smith and all over, do these little deals like this. We had no notes, no preparation. We just get up there and talk. And we had a lot of fun doing that. I got where when he couldn't think of the punchline for his stories, I could. And vice versa. He would remember mine when I couldn't remember them. More I cannot remember. But boy, he was special, and we're going to miss him. And he brought honor to our state.
Thank you. Now, You early on developed not only a love for politics, which we're going to talk about, but you developed a love for history, in which we're going to talk about. But that started, according to your book and according to the stories you used to tell me when we traveled the state together, at a place called Poison Spring and at a place called the Ingham Library in Camden. What role did that play to you in shaping your history and your love of history in those two particular locations?
Well, the old Ingham Library was, when I was a child, we lived just about 2 blocks from right downtown Camden. I could walk back and forth and go down to the Ingham Library and check out books and whatever. Well, ultimately, that little library, which was one room, I can still remember smelling that aroma of old newspapers and old books and whatever in that little library. And when they built the new Camden Library, and by the way, it burned about 3 years ago, Mark and I took, with Joy and Barbara, we took 500 books down there for the new library that we were recycling and so forth. But that little library was very special to me. The librarian was Miss Lalla Thornton. And Miss Lalla knew every book in the library, and she knew which ones that we were reading, which ones we were through with, and she would recommend books. And I would sit back in the corner, sort of, in that little library and read. Well, ultimately, my mom, when we all left town and went to school and did this, that, and the other, she bought that little library and had it picked up and moved out on the Chichester Highway. And she basically just let it sit there for a number of years until the Chichester McCullum House took it and brought it behind the home place for the Ouachita County Historical Society. And it's there today. It's been recreated. It's wonderful. It still has that great aroma. Sometimes the Historical Association meets in Camden, and many of you have been to that meeting, usually in the daffodil period, and they go out to the little library. But that was this little special building for me. But my mother also bought the house next to the library where she played as a child, and she moved it out on the Chichester Highway and restored it. She cut it into 4 pieces. It had 4 fireplaces, and she redid all the fireplaces and all the structure, and that's where she lived until 1984 when she passed away. But so anyway, that was just the Poison Springs thing wasn't quite as dramatic. I was in the state legislature, and no one knew about the Battle of Poison Springs in the Civil War. I won't go into all that. Bobby Roberts would correct me because he's a true historian. I'm a rank amateur. But I introduced a piece of legislation to create Poison Springs State Park. And this is sort of the power of Orville Faubus during that period. Faubus signed that bill into law, regretfully, because he sent me word he was doing it in spite of and not because of the state representative from Ouachita County. And I got that word pretty clearly. And a few weeks later, in the spring, they had a big dedication down there. And even though I was the chief sponsor and sort of the only sponsor of the legislation to create Poison Springs, I hear Barbara over here laughing. She knows what I'm going to say. But we went out to the park to dedicate and everything. And everybody from the county judge to the governor to the lieutenant, everybody you can imagine, from the state highway commissioner and all, they all were up on the main stage, and I was way back in the back trying to get a chair to sit on, and I never even got recognized. But that was okay. But you can still find Poison Spring. You can see an arrow going out there close to White Oak Lake now. That's part of it. But that was a part of history that I enjoyed talking about, the Civil War history. I wish I knew more about it. I probably know more about World War II than I do the Civil War history, but that was just part of it, Skip.
You write in your book, you write, quote, "My calling has been politics." You were elected, listen to this, you were elected president of the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, And your senior year at Camden High School, you were elected president of the student body. That's a pretty good run, Senator. Your grandfather was sheriff of Ouachita County. Your dad was sheriff of Ouachita County. Your mother was the first woman to seek elective office in Arkansas after women were given the right to vote. She later became one of the first women to ever serve on a school board. She was the one who got you interested in the plight of nursing home residents. You had a pretty good run as a state representative, a congressman, governor, and senator. Your son had a pretty good run as a state representative, attorney general, and U.S. senator. Is it in the DNA?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it is, but I've always loved it. I've always, I'm kind of like a moth to the flame, I guess you would say. It brings me, I don't know, I just enjoy it. I enjoy politics. I enjoy people and the whole business about it. But, you know, I truly think that about that running for president of the class every year, it shows you my desire to embellish stories and maybe to even embellish the truth a little bit, because I remember that I was running for president of the third grade class, and Mary Bragg Wheeler was our teacher. There were 3 or 4 of us running. She asked all of us to go out while they were counting the votes. We came back in, and she said, "Well, David," and I issued up a little prayer. I said, "Dear God, if I can just get elected president of 3rd grade, I'll never want anything else. That'll be it." So sure enough, she says, you became president. So I think after that, I can't remember having an opponent after that. Maybe I did, but I don't remember who it was. They should have voted for someone else, I imagine.
I don't know of anybody in Arkansas that was elected president of their class from the 3rd grade through the 11th grade and then student body president. That may be your singular political accomplishment. The people that knew you best voted for you. That's good.
But, you know, I see, Skipper, I see Tom Courtway back here, the distinguished president of UCA. He's one of the best staff people, next to you, of course.
And
Bruce. Next to Bruce Lindsay.
And next to Carmi.
Next to Carmi. And all, I've got a lot of good, wonderful friends out in the audience who we served together with. But I will never forget telling Tom Courtway about some of the old, he liked to hear these old Camden stories, and we'll get into some of those, but if I tell too many of them, I'm afraid that I won't get through the questions you have.
Yeah, because I got a bunch. And one I want to ask you is one you've told before, but that a lot of people, particularly a lot of young people, don't know. Those of us on your staff know, but that was when you went to Washington to page for Congressman Orrin Harris. And tell us the story of the dime.
Well, first, in 1951, in the spring, I tripped downtown one time to the Strand Theater and gave them a dime and got in, and I watched a movie called Born Yesterday. Do y'all remember Born Yesterday? Judy Holliday and William Holden and all these people, you know. Ron Robinson, by the way, would know every one of those actors, and when the movie came out, about 1951, I went home that evening and I wrote a letter to Congressman Orrin Harris, who was our congressman, and I said, if you have any chance to hire me as a page this summer, I would like to be a page, and because it was based in Washington, it was very inspiring to me. And so, sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I still have the letter. Airmail, special delivery, David Pryor, 418 Graham Street, Camden, Arkansas. Says, Monday you can come and be a page in the house for our page from Magnolia has withdrawn. He's got to be home for some reason during the summer. So I went, and the first day I went as a page to the U.S. Capitol, my mother had driven me up there in a 1951. My dad was a Chevrolet dealer in a coupe. A Chevrolet coupe, a maroon coupe. I wish I had it right now. It'd be worth a lot. But we spent a couple of nights in the old Dodge Hotel, and she drove back to Camden, and I found a little room over on 832 D Street Southeast. And I moved into this room, went up to the U.S. Capitol. I'd never been in the Capitol before, and walked in, and I now just kind of announced. I said, "I'm a page. I'm David Pryor from Arkansas. I'm Orrin Harris's page, Congressman Harris's page." And they said, "Oh, they've been looking for you." So I reported to William Fishbait Miller from Pascagoula, Mississippi. He was the doorkeeper. I said, "Mr. Miller, I'm David Pryor. I'm Congressman Harris's page." He said, "We've been looking everywhere for you. The Senate's been in all night. You've got to go down there and be a page in the Senate today. We'll talk about your duties here and get you signed up later." So I said, "Well, gosh, where's the Senate?" I didn't. So I walked down through the rotunda, through Statuary Hall, got to the Senate, opened the door, and there was a senator on the floor, and he had kind of a beard, looked like he'd been up all night. And he was making a long-winded speech. In fact, he'd been filibustering all night. And he snapped his fingers as he saw me because all the pages had gone home and gone to sleep. I was the only one there, you know. So I went down into the well of the Senate, and he reached in his pocket and had a $10 bill. And he said, "Here." And he scribbled it. And once again, he was controlling the floor at that time. And once you leave, then you lose control. So he scribbled out his address. He said, "Here's my address for my apartment out on Mass Avenue. You get in a taxi. Here's the money. You go to my place. Here's the key to my apartment. Look in the closet and bring me my bedroom slippers." He said, "I'm going to be up a long time." Well, guess who that senator was? It was Senator Joe McCarthy of Wisconsin. So I get in a taxi cab, go out on Mass Avenue, find his apartment building, and go in and bring his bedroom slippers to me. It was the first day I was ever in the Capitol, certainly the first day I'd ever been to the U.S. Senate, and the first day that I'd seen Joe McCarthy, and it was my first and only taxi ride for a long time. So that was quite a big day for me. But that summer was very, very good because I got to go to a lot of the hearings. I got to go to a lot of events on Capitol Hill. I got to I would sneak around and listen to committee meetings and things like that when I was off duty. But that really inspired me about Washington, D.C. that summer. I enjoyed it, and I loved it, and still do.
And what'd you do with the dime?
Okay, the dime. I get off the subject.
No, quite frankly, I'd never heard the McCarthy slipper story before.
I'm sentimental and I'm superstitious. And so when I was leaving the Page job and coming back to Camden to practice football August 20th and graduate from high school at Camden, I said, I want to do something a little different. So I got a dime out of my pocket, and I went down in the basement of the Capitol, and I crawled up between a crevice and some big columns, and I stuck my hand back there, and I put this dime back there in the corner. And I said, "Dime, you stay up there someday. When I'm a congressman, I'm going to come back and get you." And sure enough, 17 years later, I came back to Washington. I was sworn in. Barbara and I had gone up there after a special election. I couldn't have done any of this without her. You know that. But I stuck this dime up there, and 17 years later, I come back, go down very quietly. I hadn't told anybody about this at that time, but I reached back in there. There was my good luck dime. Now that dime, I stuck it back up there, but people still ask me, they say, "Is that dime still there?" I said, "I don't know. It's part of the subway system now." So I assume it's there, but I assume it is entombed forever in the bowels of the U.S. Capitol building. But I love the old Capitol building, and as a result of being in love with that building, I was ultimately, when I went to the Senate, I was put on the Capitol Historical Commission there in the state capitol, representing one of the Senate members. There was a Democrat and Republican, and I had the chance to serve on that. And that was when Bruce was up there with me at that time. He started out with me and stayed with me as long as he could, but we had a great time together. That was my dime story. That made it in Reader's Digest, that whole dime story, for some reason or other.
I think that McCarthy slipper story ought to make sense. But As a college student at the University of Arkansas, you and your buddy Kenny Danforth, who, like Ben Beaumont, was editor of the Arkansas Traveler, you all came to the state capitol as a college student to testify against a bill to establish the Arkansas Sovereignty Commission. You write in your book, quote, "They said too many speakers had shown up on both sides. We learned later that the university administration had quietly squelched our testimony, fearing slashes in the school's appropriations." So can you tell us about that? And then today, as a member of the University of Arkansas Board of Trustees,
With Marl Harriman.
what would you say to students who wanted to speak out on controversial issues?
I'd say speak out. Don't hold back. Speak, and do it loudly and do it clearly and do it with passion and be on the right side of history. That's what I would do. But let me tell you a little bit. We talked about... We talked today, and I say that we are very knowledgeable of the fact that we had a bad siege, a bad patch in 1957. That was in September of 1957. But leading up to 1957, just a moment if I could, something was beginning to happen throughout the South. It was 3 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, several of the southern states, Georgia had enacted and brought into being something called state sovereignty commissions. Arkansas didn't have anything like that. Faubus was governor. But in my opinion at that time, I could still argue this, I don't know. I never knew if Faubus himself was an ardent segregationist or was he an opportunist? May have been both. But whatever the case may be, in 1957, in January, in the legislature, this was 7-8 months before the Central High School crisis. Before that crisis, the state legislature took it on itself to create in Arkansas a state sovereignty commission. It was introduced by a group from the Delta, some of the state senators, and it was a hot item. Kenny Danforth, El Dorado, Arkansas, myself, we came down we were self-appointed from the student body. Well, we came down to speak, quote, in behalf of the student body of the University of Arkansas. Can you imagine that? And we were going to come and get a place on the agenda that night. We got there and we couldn't even get close to the Capitol. We were going to testify against the creation of the Sovereignty Commission. Well, the Sovereignty Commission was the item of the ticket of the day. That was the big discussion item in Arkansas. And so as a result of us coming down there, the president of the university, the acting president, Storm Whaley, a great guy, he met Kenny and myself on the steps of the Capitol. He was nervous. He was looking all around for us. And we said, well, gosh, Dr. Whaley, Mr. President, here we are. He said, yeah, but you guys can't talk. He said, we're going to lose our appropriation if y'all talk for the University of Arkansas. So they would not let us talk, but we did get into the chamber. And I'll never forget people like, we all make fun of Mutt Jones. Mutt Jones got up and made an eloquent speech against the creation of the Sovereignty Commission. Robert Hayes Williams, a fine senator from Russellville. Robert Hayes Williams just died about 2 years ago. He got up, and I'll never forget his speech that night. He said, you know, if we can go after the NAACP tonight, we can go after the Rotary Club in Russellville tomorrow. And, you know, there was a lot to that. And I take those little vignettes and those little words of wisdom and those speeches, and there were only about 3 members of the Senate and about 6 members of the House that voted against the Sovereignty Commission. But those fellas, those ladies and gentlemen, I think it was just gentlemen at that time, they deserve some kind of a plaque and some kind of recognition for their courage and their bravery under those circumstances. The hearing was packed. The galleries were packed that night. Former Governor Ben Laney came and spoke for the Sovereignty Commission. Former Governor Sid McMath spoke against the Sovereignty Commission. Winthrop Rockefeller issued a statement saying that this Sovereignty Commission was going to damage the economic well-being of our state. But it was created, of course, but it only met one time. And it only met one time because Jim Johnson, Justice Johnson, and Bruce Bennett, the Attorney General, sort of took it over. And Faubus was wary of these two fellows. He was very suspicious of Bruce and Justice Jim Johnson. And as a result, he never called another meeting of the Sovereignty Commission. So that's a little vignette about the State Sovereignty Commission. But Danforth and Pryor, we will go to our graves wishing we could have got up and spoken against the Sovereignty Commission, but they wouldn't let us. So anyway.
So you moved from the legislature to Congress, and then you return as governor, and you're elected in 1974. And on your inauguration in 1975, long before it was the site of a presidential announcement, long before it was the site of election nights, you picked the old State House for your 1975 inauguration. Why did you choose the old State House?
Well, I don't know. I just always liked it. I liked the building. I always felt real comfortable in the building. I thought it was a historic building, one, because it's where we seceded from the Union, in that very building. We had the vote in the Senate and House chamber. I think, Bobby, I hope I'm getting everything right here. But this is where we seceded from the Union. This is right as the Civil War was beginning. And I always loved that building, and I still love it today, and I urge all of you to support it and to be a part of keeping it as it is and even making it better, because so many people go through that building. I remember one time that Lady Bird Johnson told me, she said, you know, I had the best opportunity recently. I was passing through Little Rock, and my plane had been delayed a couple of hours, and I got in a taxi, and I said, where could I go and see where the old State House is? And so she went, and it was like 5:15, and they'd already locked the doors, and she knocked on the door. She didn't have Secret Service with her, and somebody came to the door, and she said, hi, I'm Lady Bird Johnson, and I'd like to take a tour here. She says, we're closed, but we're going to give you a tour. And so they gave her, but people like that from all over the world. Of course, the old State House, not a lot of people know this, ultimately became our med center. That was our medical center, the old State House. And it just has a lot of history and whatever. And the other reason, Senator Max Howell we were off and on in our relationship, and Max didn't really want me to make a speech at the Capitol, so I made it at the old State House, I think. But I ultimately made a short speech at the Capitol, but he didn't want it to go very long, which I know Skip doesn't want this to go very long. But that's why I guess why we chose to go. It was cold. Barbara was freezing to death. Ed Wright, Lindsay Jennings, Bruce's senior partner in his firm, in his dad's firm. Mr. Wright said I had asked him to be the MC. And just as I was getting up to speak, I had about a 25-minute speech. It was cold. The fountains were frozen up. Mr. Wright says, try to hold this to about 6 minutes, if you will. I said, oh, gosh, okay. So anyway, I tried to hold it, but we were all freezing to death. But it was a special day, 1975. Thank you. Well, Skip, I want to tell you, in the state legislature, you mentioned the state legislature. I was there 6 years. That was during the Faubus time, and there was a group called the Young Turks, and I was a part of the Young Turk movement in the state. We couldn't get anything done. We couldn't pass anything. Faubus had everything bottled up. And I tell the story, I used to tell this to some of my colleagues in Washington. When Winston Churchill died, I introduced a resolution praising, memorializing Winston Churchill, one of the greatest leaders in all-time history of the world, truthfully, memorializing him. It was referred to the Memorials Committee. Merle, it is still out there. It is still out there. It never saw the light of day. Arkansas became the only state, I think, that did not memorialize Winston Churchill. I mean, that was because I'd introduced it. But that was how things, you know, we had committees on paper, but they never met. Or if they met, people like me never got invited to the committee meetings. You know, they'd meet around Paul Van Dawson's desk or Glenn Walther's desk or something. But for most of us, or a lot of us, I should say, a lot of us during that period, we weren't a part of the committee structure.
Okay, as governor, you named the first woman to the Arkansas Supreme Court, Elsie Jane Trimble Roy. You named the first African-American to the Arkansas Supreme Court, George Howard. You named the first woman to the Arkansas Highway Commission, Patsy Thomason. And your appointment of Kenestra Hodges to the United States Senate surprised most everyone, including Parker Westbrook. What was your thought process in making these appointments, and did you see breaking down barriers an important part of your role as governor?
Wow, Skip, that's hard to pinpoint as to the process we went through. But I think all of that is a little bit of it. I think I always enjoyed the appointments, and I know with Kenestra, there were about 30 people, I think, who wanted to serve that 1 year that was still left on Senator McClellan's term. And they had the services here, and I was governor at that time and whatever. And, of course, we had run against each other in 1972, only a few years before, probably 6 or 7 years before. But we had that big battle in 72, and here I was kind of hosting all these senators and people from Washington. And a little tidbit about that appointment. The word came to me that Mrs. McClellan, Norma McClellan, might be interested in that seat. And so I went to, they lived at where'd they live, Barbara? Riviera. And I went to that apartment building the night of the funeral. The plane had gone back to Washington. That had carried the vice president, Mondale, and others to Arkansas for the services. But it had gone, and I had an appointment with Mrs. McClellan. Well, I got there on whatever floor and knocked on the door and walked in. There were a lot of people standing around Mrs. McClellan. And she said, I'd like to ask all of you to go out in the hall. And so here they were, Herbert McAdams and all these people all went out in the hall, closed the door, and they were probably like this. But I said, Ms. McClellan, I think I may have called her Norma. Norma, I'm here to, and just as I started to say, to offer you a seat in the United States Senate, she said, David, stop. She said, you don't have to do this, and I don't have to do this. I don't want any part of politics. I'm moving to North Carolina, and thank you so much for coming. Well, we had a cup of coffee, and I left. And that was it. But I did was about to offer the seat to Mrs. McClellan. Well, then all of my pals, not all of my pals, but a lot of good people, developed interest in this race, had a year to go on Senator McClellan's term. And one of the few people who did not seek the office, did not seek the Senate seat, was the lawyer from Newport, Kenestra Hodges. And I called Kenestra up 2 or 3 days later. I said, Kenestra, I'd like to announce tomorrow that I'm going to name you to the U.S. Senate. And so get your house in order. He said, I can't do it. I've got big farming operations. I've got a law practice. I've got to see my children are still in high school, junior high school in Newport. I said, Kenestra, I'll call you at 8 o'clock in the morning. And if you want to tell me that you're going to deny your children and your grandchildren the right to say that my dad and grandfather was a U.S. Senator, at 8 o'clock I'm going to ask you that question. So we hung up. Next morning at 8 o'clock, I called Kanister in Newport. He says, I'll do it. So that was how Kanister went to the Senate. He served very ably and very capably. And in fact, I was at the Liberty Bowl Saturday afternoon, and I was at the same place with Susan and Merle Harriman having a barbecue. I thought there was going to be about 50 people. There were 5,000 people. This great hall eating. And this couple from Newport came up and says, do you happen to know a guy named Kanister Hodges? I said, yeah, I know Kanister pretty well. So he wasn't aware of all that history, of course.
Okay, you said your favorite all-time speech is Lou Gehrig's Luckiest Man in the World at Yankee Stadium in 1939. You've always recognized the spoken word and the written word, and before you left the Senate, you went to Louisiana at an event for the Long family. And on the way home from Louisiana back to Arkansas, you and Barbara discussed and envisioned a place called the Pryor Center. Can you talk about that, what you see today? They're filming this today, and where you see it, because without editorializing, it is one of the greatest gifts that you all have ever done for this state. It is fantastic. So will you talk about that?
Thanks, Gil. When Russell Long, well, there was Russell Long and then his brother Earl Long. Russell was governor, elected to the Senate, had been indicted, couldn't leave Louisiana, but was still a U.S. Senator and a governor at the same time. That's never happened before, of course. That was Huey P. Long, I'm sorry. His brother Earl, Uncle Earl, came along a 3 years later, and he became also a very, very interesting public figure. But when Russell Long retired from the Senate, his wife Carolyn just died about 3 months ago. When Senator Long retired, he'd been chairman of Finance Committee, the committee that I served on, and I just loved Russell Long. Loved all of his stories, loved to hear him talk about his Uncle Earl and his father, Huey P. Long, and so forth. Of course, Huey P. helped Hattie Caraway. She would not have been elected to the U.S. Senate had it not been for Senator Huey Long and Governor Huey Long coming into Arkansas and spending 8 days and speaking to over 300,000 people in Hattie Caraway's race for the U.S. Senate. That was Huey P., and that was 1932, in August of 1932. His first speech was in Magnolia. Then he came to Camden. Then he went to Fordyce. Then he ended up that first night over in Pine Bluff, and he said that electricity went off in the ballpark, and he was out there speaking in the dark, and he blamed it on AP&L, the Arkansas Power and Light Company, for turning off the electricity. But anyway, that was a remarkable 8 days. We went down when he retired, and they had a big ceremony in Baton Rouge in the state capitol, and I was one of the speakers. And Edwin Edwards and myself and 3 or 4 more from, I think, Joe Biden, I'm not sure. But we all spoke and paid our great tributes to Senator Long leaving the Senate. And they said, well, you've got tomorrow morning, what are you going to be doing? I said, well, we're going to be driving back later in the morning, I think. They said, what would you like to do? I said, we'd like to go to LSU and look at their library and see what they do in this oral history program that we had heard a lot about. So sure enough, they set us up a tour, and we went through this oral history program. It was just fabulous. It was just the audio. It didn't have the video at LSU at that time. But on the audio, we were so impressed with all of the interviews, the hundreds of interviews they had of Louisiana people. And driving back, Barbara and I were talking, driving from Baton Rouge back to Little Rock. We decided that we had some campaign money left over, and we decided that we could take about $250,000 or something like that, and that was pretty well deplete us. And maybe the University of Arkansas would be interested in starting an oral and history program. Well, then we got interested in the visual part of it, and we went to the family that owned Channel 7 right here in Little Rock, just a few blocks away. And that family, Joe Albritton, I went to see Joe Albritton. I said, "You've got this fabulous library. No one has a film library like you do." That Jim Pitcock and Randy Dixon, Randy now is our director at the Pryor Center in Fayetteville, and we decided that we would add the name visual, oral and visual history to it. Well, about that time, our friend Don Tyson came through and he said, "I want to help this. I like this because it helps us keep our history and whatever." And he wrote a check for $2 million, which really helped us. Super amount. We should have named it the Tyson Program, not for Barbara and myself. But it's really good. It's just been moved. It started off in Jeannie Wayne's desk drawer, Bobby and the state and the Department of History. And we had one little $29.95 tape recorder, and we went around interviewing people with that. Then we morphed and we moved to the library. We got bigger and bigger and moved to the top of the Mullins Library. And then just recently, about 5 weeks ago, we had our grand opening on the square in Fayetteville. The university purchased the old bank building there on the square, First National Bank building, and it is at that time, Patty's one of our, and Marilyn are on our board of advisors. Archie Schaefer's our chair, and we just opened our new facility. We want all of you, when you go to Fayetteville, or when you're not thinking about going to Fayetteville, go up there to see it. And we've got we have one interview room, two coming online, and we're going to want as many people as possible to record their interviews. We sort of patterned some of this after NPR, the StoryCorps, and the StoryCorps is a fabulous deal. I was on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Board for 8 years, and now we have 3 StoryCorps buses. We have 5 StoryCorps buses that go across the country recording interviews, but they're just audio. It's not the visual. We want to do one day with the visual and audio, but until that time, we're going to be based in Fayetteville on the square. We want you to use it. We want to work with the historical societies and everyone else that we can think of, and all the other colleges and universities. And we're not just Fayetteville based, we're Arkansas based, and that's what we hope that recording all those histories is going to be about. Many of those histories are now on the website. Just go to University of Arkansas Pryor Center, and you start dialing up some of those interviews we've done. Some of them are fabulous. I think the best interview yet, Skip, I know I'm digressing. One of the best interviews yet, and I'm so glad we got him before we passed away, Frank Thomas here, who works with Stevens. He was on our staff, but his father was the FBI agent down in El Dorado for a long time, a number of years. And right as he finished his training at Quantico to be an FBI agent, he moved back to El Dorado. He had played football for the Razorbacks. He was assigned, listen to this, Frank Thomas, El Dorado, Arkansas, in the 1950s, he was assigned to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan. And we have that. We have it on, it's an hour. It is wonderful. And that's Floyd Thomas. And Floyd was not only a great citizen down there in El Dorado, but a great person to be with the FBI. And he would talk about passing the collection church at night, and if it was held a certain way, that was a sign that the Klan was going to be meeting that evening. And things like this. No, it was fascinating. But those are the type of stories, I think, that bind Arkansas and Arkansans together, that sort of makes us a unique little state. And we love working with the Pryor Center, and we try to stay out of their hair as much as possible, but we're honored that Barbara's brother Scott is associated, has been since its inception. Randy Dixon has now been with us over 3 years. We have the entire Channel 7 collection, 27,000 hours of Channel 7. Every newscast since 1956, we have it. It's going to be digitized. We can't afford to do it all now. It's being done just a few bars at a time, but it's going to be the most fabulous collection in the United States of America. No other college or university is doing this. We're the first. We're proud of it, and it's going to live on for generations to come. Thank you.
There are a couple of just general topics that I want to cover. One is, which I think is a fascinating story, is your reconciliation with Orville Faubus.
Well, I had fallen out with Faubus when I was a college student. I wrote editorials for the Arkansas Traveler, where our grandson, Adams Pryor, is now the chief photographer. And he's on their board at the Arkansas Traveler, the daily paper for the university paper. And Adams loves that work, but I wrote editorials about Faubus even when I was in college because I had been wounded deeply. I'd worked in the Francis Cherry campaign. In 1954, I was Governor Cherry's campaign driver through the state during that summer that he was upset by Orville E. Faubus, this postmaster from up in Huntsville, Arkansas, that had been a part of the McMath administration. But so I took that defeat so badly that it spilled over, and Faubus and I never really got along, and it got deeper and deeper and deeper. Finally, we ended up running against each other for governor in 1974, and he had been defeated by Dale Bumpers at that time, but came out of retirement, I think, to keep me from being governor. I'm not sure why, but that was the case, and he was tough. I'm going to tell you what, he was still tough. He was a little bit debilitated in his campaign organization, but he was a tough guy out there on the stump, and that's when we had pretty good-sized rallies. But Orville Faubus and I were just like this. But one day, just out of the clear blue, after all of those years of animosity and whatever, I was out in the UAMS, and I was in the intensive care unit, and a nurse came in late one night and says, "By the way, a man came out here. I didn't recognize him. He left he signed his name on a slip, and he wanted you to see it. We wouldn't let him in because of the rules or whatever." And I went out in the garage this morning to see if I could find it, and luckily I found it, this little message, and I'll just read it to you. Skip, I know we're going over our time. All right. This was signed at the hospital. It says, "David, once I helped beat you politically. Then you beat me. Bygones are bygones. I wish you well, Orville E. Faubus." So anyway, I've always kind of treasured that little agenda item right there, and ultimately what was that story that we went to a veterans cemetery or dedication or something like that?
We were at the anniversary of the Arkansas Education Television Association. I mean, the offices in Conway. Orville Faubus was Frank White's director of Veterans Affairs, right, and was the speaker that day because he was governor and was dedicated. And he said nice things to you, about you in his remarks. And you came up to me because I'd driven you to Conway, and you said, "You don't have to drive me to BB tomorrow for the Veterans Home dedication."
I said that to you, yeah.
Yeah, and I said, "Why?" And you said, "Because I'm going to drive Orville Faubus. It is time to end all the hate." And I said, "You're going to do what?" and I said, do you know how to get to BB? And you said, "I can drive Orville Faubus. You don't have to go. You take the day off." And you drove him.
Well, yeah, we drove up there that day to dedicate something about a cemetery, and I don't remember what. But yeah, we eventually his wife called and said that she was having trouble getting Orville in the med center. He was going through chemotherapy, and at that time I had some sway or whatever, and I called certain people at the med center, and they took him the next day. And I think I drove him out there and took him into his first chemotherapy.
More sway than you had as a student. at the university trying to speak at the Sovereignty Commission. You were able to help Governor Faubus.
Yeah, well, as they say, as he said, let's let bygones be bygones. You know.
All right, now talk briefly about your admiration and respect, because Bruce and Ray Scott and all of us that worked with you, Carmi, saw this great relationship between you and John Paul Hammersmith. Would you talk about that?
Well, we were elected the same year, and I'd never met John Paul. In 1966, we were both chosen for the House of Representatives, and I'd been campaigning about 18 months for that job, and my wonderful law partner, Harry Barnes, kept food on our table for Barbara and myself and our 3 children at that time, 3 boys. And so John Paul and I met for the first time, I think, when we got to Washington, and John Paul in Virginia and Barbara and myself. And so we got to know them very, very well. And as far as I know, we never had even the inkling of a crossword. He didn't campaign against me. I didn't campaign against him. And we kind of let each other do their own thing. And like John Paul was one of the leaders in the fight to save the Buffalo River. And he took on Congressman Trimble, a Democrat who was supporting the damming up of the river. And John Paul fought him, or I say fought, was his adversary on that position in the campaign. But we became very, very close friends. We did the Pryor Center, went over to Harrison. We did an interview with him that took almost all day. I did a portion of the interview. And of interest, that night later, after we got back to Little Rock or Fayetteville, my phone rang. It was John Paul. And he said, I'm embarrassed to ask you this. I said, well, what? He says, is it possible? And we had to rent a U-Haul truck, put all this equipment in there, go from Fayetteville over to Harrison and back to Little Rock and wherever. He says, can I redo that interview? I said, what, John Paul? He said, yes. He said, you know, Bill Clinton ran against me in 1974. And he said, I said some things about him I shouldn't have said. And I don't want that to be on my permanent record. I said, John Paul, give us a few days. We'll saddle up. We'll be back. We'll do it again. So we did. So that part about his remarks about Bill Clinton, and they did have a pretty tight race there. Bill Clinton almost won that race, but John Paul bested him at the end. But they had a fairly good relationship themselves even after that, I think respectful.
Well, I think that speaks well of your relationship with Congressman Hammersmith, but it also speaks well about the objectivity of the Pryor Center to record history the way people want to tell their stories. And well, I appreciate you. I think that was great.
We're not in the gotcha game. We're not in that game to try to trick someone up. There's a family here, and I won't mention. We tried to get them to interview with us, and I think they are fearful that we're going to try to play a trick on them or something. But we'll get there eventually, and we'll have that interview, and we need to do that interview. But we're not in the trickster business. That's not what we're about. But.
Well, at the conclusion of this, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to talk with Senator Pryor and ask personal questions when he's signing books and talking to you outside. But I've got to ask this question because it is, as we talked about preparing for this interview, there were 2 big issues that I think people wanted to hear. One, which you did in a very eloquent way, about your friendship and admiration for Dale Bumpers. Now, as the president of the 3rd through 11th grade classes and student body president and all sorts of elective office, what about 2016 presidential politics?
What about it?
Well, I can give you my thoughts, but I'm really asking for
your
yours.
thoughts. You know more about this than I do.
What do you think?
Well, I don't know. It's a hard one for me to cope with, and I will kind of be careful here. But I've always adopted the old 40-40-20 rule. That generally speaking, these are in general terms. 40% of the people are going to vote Republican. 40% of the people are going to be Democratic. Vote Democratic. And that other 20% out there is what you've got to go for and what you've got to focus on. I have a feeling that that 20% out there right now are the people who are gravitating to Trump. I also have a feeling that as history teaches us, that I think that by Election Day in November, people will have taken a deep breath and will sort this thing out on their own. And you may see, once again, 40-40-20, but I don't think people want to radicalize the White House. And I think we've got to look today who's experienced in foreign affairs and whatever, and because we're in the foreign affairs business right now. One thing that also I might do, I think that in a way, I think that there's a comparison with Governor Beebe, just left the governor's office, and Hillary. And that comparison is this. When Governor Beebe was elected, and I was probably one of them, I said, oh my, he's been in the state senate 20 years or whatever. And, oh, I'm sorry, that's, I'm sorry. It was Donald Trump probably. Okay.
If it's Donald Trump, you got the rest of this alone.
I don't understand. He wouldn't know who I was. Okay, or am. But there's this little comparison with Mike Beebe, Governor Beebe, and Hillary, because Mike Beebe becomes governor after 20 some odd years. How many, Merle, in the state senate? 20? That's right, and Attorney General. When he took office, 135 members of the state legislature, they knew that this guy, knew more about government than they did. They knew it. And I have a sense that some of that knowledge was going to help Hillary Clinton when it comes down to it, and when the people sort this thing out a little bit and take a deep breath, and you get through the campaign rally stage, and you get down to really making decisions. That's just my top of the, just where I am right now. And I just have no idea what's going to happen. I can't believe some of the candidates that stay in there. You know, I'm not running for president. I've got more votes than some of these fellows do. So I don't know how they do it. But the enormity of that decision, Citizens United, I'm going to tell you what, that is one of the worst decisions since the Dred Scott decision. That's the worst thing that can happen. And that, honestly, we've got to get that repealed. And furthermore, I think that nothing has been said in this campaign about an issue that all of us ought to pay attention to. I don't even think it's been raised, and that is, who's going to be appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States? We never even talk about that. We're talking about the illegal immigrants. We're talking about Syria. We're talking about this, that, and the other. But who is going to be named to the Supreme Court? That is one of the most critical decisions in our generation, and that's what I think they need to start talking about.
20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, you gave this to me. And for those who have not seen the Pryor office that Barbara and Joy have done a masterful job with on Izzard Street.
Joy's office, actually, and
yeah.
Susie.
Yeah, and Susie. But if you've not seen this office at 201 Izzard, and Susie's going to kill me for telling you all to go there. It ought to be on the Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau places to see. It is a museum. It is fabulous. It is a walk through history. It is one of the neatest places that we have in Little Rock, and I've already sent hundreds of people there and will continue to do that. But about 20 years ago, we walked out of the federal building together in Little Rock, and this is what was the last thing we did. This was recorded on the phone. It says, "You have reached the former office of Senator David Pryor. Because of the senator's retirement, it was necessary for him to close this office to assist in the transition of a new United States Senator. If you need immediate assistance, you may wish to contact Senator Dale Bumpers at 324-6286.
He hated me for this, but
Thank you for calling and have a happy holiday season." It says to Skip, did you ever think this day would come? Thanks and friendship, DP. DP, thanks and friendship. It has been a great walk through Arkansas history. We love you, man. Senator David Pryor, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for coming. We'll see you in the lobby.